Some moments arrive without warning. They slip into our lives on quiet nights, without fanfare, without announcement, without any hint that, years later, we might look back on them as the turning point we never knew we needed. Ronald Reagan had such a moment, one he rarely, if ever, spoke about. Not because it was scandalous or shameful, because it reached into a part of him words could never fully describe. It happened long before the world knew his name, before the lights, before the cameras, before history placed him behind podiums and in front of nations. He was just Ronnie then, a young man still shaping himself, still trying to understand who he wanted to become, still wrestling with the quiet worries he hid behind an easy smile. It was early autumn, the kind of season when the Midwest feels like it's taking a slow, deep breath. The days were warm, the nights cool, and the air carried the faint, earthy scent of burning leaves. Reagan had always liked that smell. It reminded him that time moves, that seasons change, that people grow whether they realize it or not. That evening, he had gone out for a walk. Not for any reason he could name, just a restlessness inside him, feeling that the walls of his small rented room were closing in. He wasn't troubled, not exactly, but he felt unsettled in a way he couldn't quite articulate. His thoughts tangled like threads in a drawer, difficult to sort, possible to ignore. He walked past the old grain mill, closed for the night, past the small diner where the cook always hummed hymns while wiping down the counters, past the rows of houses with their soft yellow windows glowing like lanterns. It was one of those nights when the world felt familiar and strange at the same time. Ronnie shoved his hands into his jacket pockets, exhaled into the crisp air, and let his feet choose the direction. Sometimes the best conversations we have are the ones with ourselves when no one else is around. Most nights in Dixon faded into gentle quiet by this hour. A dog barked somewhere far off. A screen door creaked. A train horn moaned in the distance. The sound wrapped around him like a memory, tugging him backward to childhood nights, when he would lie awake listening to trains and imagining where they were going. He didn't know it yet. But this was the night everything in him would shift, just slightly. Just enough that the world would never look exactly the same again. The moon hung low, partially veiled by drifting clouds. The street lamps cast soft cones of gold onto the pavement. Each pool of light felt like a tiny stage, and Ronnie passed through them like an actor unsure of his lines as he walked. His thoughts kept circling the same quiet questions. What does it mean to be good? What does it mean to be strong? What kind of man am I becoming? He was at that age, too old to be a boy, not yet confident enough to feel like a man. He had always believed people were meant to help one another, to lift each other up. His mother had instilled that in him, Ronnie. You measure a person not by how they treat the powerful, but by how they treat the ones who have nothing. Those words followed him into adulthood like a lantern. But tonight that lantern flickered. There was something heavy on his mind, though he tried not to admit it. He had recently seen something, nothing dramatic, nothing anyone else would have given a second thought, but it had lodged itself inside him, a coworker mocked by others, simply because he was slow to understand things. A quiet, timid man named Harold, whose hands shook when too many eyes were on him. Ronnie had defended him, gently, indirectly, but not enough. Not in a way that stopped the laughter or protected Harold's dignity. And that failure haunted him. Was kindness still kindness, if it was only half delivered? Was goodness still goodness, if fear held it back? He kicked a pebble along the pavement, listening to it rattle ahead of him. A cool wind brushed across his cheek, carrying whispers of coming winter. As he approached the edge of town, the lights thinned out. The houses grew older, porches sagging, roofs patched with mismatched shingles. A few windows still glowed with lamplight, but most streets were empty. And that emptiness, the quiet of it, did something to him. It made him feel small and young and uncertain. He turned down a narrow side street, one he rarely walked. It curved gently toward the river. Trees arched overhead, their branches rustling like an ancient choir. Then, as he stepped beneath the largest street lamp on the road, he stopped. Something in the distance pulled his attention. He didn't know what at first. Just a shape, a shadow, movement where movement shouldn't have been. Squeed. Near an old wooden bench by the riverbank, under the dim reach of the last lamp on the street, he saw someone. A lone figure sitting hunched forward, elbows on knees, head bowed. Nothing unusual. People sat. People rested. But something about the way this person sat still, it's unmoving, almost folded inward, made Ronnie pause. He told himself to keep walking. This wasn't his business. It wasn't his place. Maybe the person simply needed solitude, but he didn't move. Something held him there beneath the street lamp. Like his feet had taken root, he took a breath and stepped forward, just a slow, cautious step as he drew closer. He heard it, a sound faint as a sigh. Then again a quiet sob. Ronnie froze. It was a man's voice, but soft, fragile, nothing like the sturdy men he knew from the factory and the fields. The sound was raw, private. The kind of grief people usually hide from the world. Ronnie felt something twist inside him. He looked around. The street was empty. The houses behind him were dark. No one else was coming. Just him. Just the night. Just a stranger drowning in silence. Ronnie swallowed hard. He had a choice. Walk away. Or step toward someone who clearly didn't want to be seen. His mother's words drifted through his mind again. Measure a person by how they treat the ones who have nothing. Another. Step forward. The figure didn't look up. Another step. Still no. Movement. Ronnie stopped a few feet away. He could see now that the man was older, with gray hair and shoulders shaking slightly. His hands were clasped together as if in prayer or desperation. Ronnie opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. What do you say to a stranger who is breaking quietly before you? How do you enter someone's sorrow without intruding on it? His throat tightened before he could decide. The man spoke not to Ronnie, but to the air, to the river, to no one. I failed her, the man whispered. Ronnie's breath caught. The words were soaked in heartbreak. I promised I would be there.
Ah!
The man continued, voice trembling. But I wasn't. And now she's gone.
No?
The river carried the confession away like a small boat slipping downstream, Ronnie felt. A surge of emotion he didn't expect. Empathy, fear, recognition. He knew that feeling. Not the loss itself, but the regret. The weight of wishing you could go back, even if you know you can't. He wanted to step closer. He wanted to say something, but he hesitated. This wasn't his sorrow. This wasn't his story. And yet, he couldn't move away. Because something about this moment, this man, this night, this confession carried into the darkness felt like it was meant for him. To witness, he cleared his throat gently. The man flinched. Startled. Wiping quickly at his eyes before turning slightly. Embarrassed at having been overheard. Ronnie raised his hands a little, wordlessly signaling, it's okay. I didn't mean to intrude, Ronnie said softly. I was just walking. The man swallowed hard, nodding but not speaking. Ronnie stepped closer, but not too close. Enough to show presence. Not enough to pressure. For a long moment neither spoke. Only the wind. Only the river. Only the grief between them. The man looked at Ronnie not suspiciously. Not defensively, but with the stunned vulnerability of someone who didn't know how to accept kindness because he hadn't expected it. Didn't mean for anyone to see. Me like this? He murmured. Ronnie sat down on the opposite end of the bench, leaving a respectful space between them. Sometimes, he said, the night brings things out of us we've been holding too long. The man exhaled shakily. He didn't argue. Didn't pretend. Didn't hide. Instead, he said the words that would stay with Ronald Reagan for the rest of his life. I always thought strength meant standing tall, the man whispered. But maybe strength is knowing when you can't. Ronnie felt those words settle inside him like seeds, deep and quiet. They would grow. He didn't know it yet, but they would grow into a belief that would shape the way he spoke, the way he led, the way he cared for others. He looked at the man, feeling something shift in his own understanding of humanity. What was her name? Ronnie asked gently. The man closed his eyes. Margaret. The name drifted into the night air and lingered there, soft and sacred. Ronnie nodded slowly. I'm sure she knew you loved her. The man's breath hitched. But before he could respond, before either of them could continue, a noise echoed faintly from behind the trees, a quiet crunch. Leaves underfoot. Someone else was there, watching, listening. And in that instant, Reagan's life veered again, towards something he could not yet see, but would never forget for a long moment. The night held its breath. Ronnie and the grieving stranger sat frozen on the bench, their attention pulled toward the sound behind the trees, a soft crunch of leaves, the gentle shift of weight, the unmistakable presence of someone else nearby. The man beside him tensed, wiping his eyes quickly, trying to gather himself as if pain were something he needed to hide. Ronnie stood slowly, not out of fear but instinct. Something about the sound felt wrong, not threatening exactly, but heavy with meaning, like a page turning before anyone was ready to read the next line. Another rustle, then silence. The stranger's voice trembled. Someone there? No answer. But Ronnie felt it. The same restless unease that had driven him out of his room earlier. Except now it swirled around both men like a cold wind. He took a step toward the trees. Hello? He called out softly. If someone needs help, we're right here. Still nothing. Just the river, the wind, the whisper of branches brushing against one another. Ronnie hesitated. Should he walk toward the sound? Should he leave it? Why did he feel compelled to see what or who had been listening? He looked back at the man on the bench, who seemed smaller somehow, folded into himself. You can stay, the man murmured, barely audible. I'm okay. But Ronnie shook his head gently. Maybe someone else isn't. He stepped off the path and into the shadows beneath the trees. The darkness felt thicker here, pressing in around him. His footsteps were soft, careful, respectful, as if he were entering a room that belonged to someone else. Then he saw her, a girl. 15, maybe 16. Sitting alone on a fallen log, knees drawn up to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them. Her head was bowed, strands of dark hair falling over her face. She looked like she was trying to make herself invisible, and suddenly, everything made sense. Ronnie approached slowly, now not wanting to startle her. It's all right, he said softly. I'm not here to bother you. The girl flinched slightly, but didn't run. She wiped at her cheeks quickly, pretending she hadn't been crying. Though the moonlight betrayed her, Ronnie kept a respectful distance. You were listening, he said gently. She nodded, still hiding her face. I didn't mean to, she whispered. I heard him. And her voice broke. Ronnie understood. Some pain is impossible to walk past. He crouched down so he wasn't towering over her. Do you know him? He asked. She shook her head. No, but I know what it feels like to lose someone. Ronnie felt a subtle shift inside him, a connection he hadn't expected. She glanced toward the bench. I didn't want him to be alone. I just didn't know how to help. The honesty in her voice hit him like a warm light cutting through cold air. It amazed him how strangers, drawn by another stranger's sorrow, could cross paths in a way none of them planned. What's your name? Ronnie asked. Emily. He nodded softly. I'm Ronnie. She managed a tiny, fragile smile. For a moment they sat in silence, listening to the river. Then Emily said something that would stay with Ronnie for decades. It's strange, she whispered. People think sadness should be hidden. But maybe sadness is how we recognize each other. Ronnie felt the words sink deep into him. They held the same quiet truth as the man on the bench had spoken earlier. He didn't realize it then, couldn't possibly know how deeply. But both sentences, from the grieving man and from this girl, would end up shaping the way he understood people for the rest of his life. Emily wiped her face and drew in a shaky breath. I should go. Ronnie nodded, but before she stepped away, he gently touched her sleeve. You weren't wrong to stop, he said softly. Sometimes showing up is all someone needs. She looked at him with grateful eyes, eyes that had known too much pain for her age, and then disappeared into the dim light of the nearby houses. leaving Ronnie with a feeling he couldn't name. He returned to the bench. The grieving man was still there, though he sat straighter now, as if trying to hold himself together in the presence of another person. "Everything all right?" the man asked, though his voice was tired. Ronnie nodded as he sat down again, this time closer than before, the space between them feeling less like distance and more like understanding. "There was a girl," Ronnie said. "She heard you. She stopped because she cared." The man let out a slow breath, something halfway between relief and sorrow. "I don't deserve anyone caring." Ronnie shook his head softly. "I don't think any of us earn kindness," he said. "I think we just need it." The man swallowed hard. For the first time, he turned fully toward Ronnie, studying him with a weary gaze. "You're young," he said quietly. "Too young to understand what real regret feels like." Ronnie didn't argue, because he did understand not the man's story, but the shape of regret. The ache of wishing you could go back. The man glanced down at his hands. "Margaret was my wife," he whispered. "She asked me to come home early that night. Said she didn't feel well. I told her I had one more shift to finish, one more delivery. I thought she'd be fine," he exhaled shakily. "When I got home," his voice cracked. "She was gone." Ronnie closed his eyes. There are moments when someone else's sorrow becomes your own, not because you share their story, but because you recognize the part of yourself that is capable of hurting like that. The man wiped his face. "I've lived every day since wondering why I didn't listen, why I didn't go home, why I thought work mattered more than her voice." Ronnie's throat tightened. He thought again of Harold at work, mocked for his slowness, while Ronnie offered only a half-hearted defense. He thought of all the times he stayed silent, all the times he hesitated when he knew someone needed him. The man's grief didn't mirror his, exactly, but it reflected something he feared becoming. "We can't change the past," Ronnie said softly. "But maybe we can let it change us." The man looked at him with eyes full of exhaustion, but also something else, a faint, flickering hope. "Do you believe that?" he asked. Ronnie nodded slowly. "I have too." The man let out a breath he'd been holding for years. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For sitting here, for listening, for not walking away." Ronnie felt his own chest swell with an unexpected emotion. "You didn't walk away either," he said. "Not from me. Not from Emily. You still showed up tonight, even in your grief. That means something." The man closed his eyes, letting the words settle. When he opened them again, the night felt different, gentler. Somehow he stood slowly. "I should go," he murmured. "But thank you." Ronnie rose too. "Take care of yourself," he said softly. The man nodded, offered a faint smile, and walked away into the quiet dark, leaving Ronnie alone on the bench where everything had begun. But he wasn't the same anymore. Something inside him had shifted, not with a jolt, not with a revelation, but with a soft turning of the soul. He looked toward the river. The moon had risen higher. The water shimmered with thin silver lines. The world felt both bigger and more fragile. And then he realized something simple, something profound. Tonight, 3 strangers had crossed paths not because of fate or accident, but because of pain. Pain had drawn them out of their homes. Pain had brought them into the night. Pain had introduced them to one another gently, quietly, without words. And pain had shown Ronnie that true strength wasn't loud or unbreakable. It was soft. It was vulnerable. It was the willingness to sit beside someone else's hurt without turning away. He stood and placed his hand on the cold metal of the street lamp pole. For a moment he let himself breathe, not the anxious breaths from earlier, but a slower, deeper breath, filled with understanding. The path home felt different now. As he walked, he thought of Harold, of Emily, of the grieving man. Of Margaret, he thought of all the people in the world carrying pain quietly, hoping someone would notice without asking, and he made himself a promise, one he would keep for the rest of his life. Even long after he became a man the world would listen to, he promised he would not walk away from someone who needed him, not again, not ever. And that promise, that simple, silent vow, changed everything. If this story touched your heart, your support means more than you know. A like, a comment, or a subscription helps these quiet memories reach others who might need them on nights of their own. Thank you for listening, for keeping these moments alive.